I think also non-Muslims around the world have been able to see Islam in a new way through Hizmet, in a way that's positive, in a way that's open, in a way that's interrelational, in a way that's about neighbors coming together and valuing each other rather than, cultures in conflict. Methodist tradition, I see value in how these schools My name is Loye Ashton, and I am the Associate Professor of Religious Studies and the Director of the Center for International Studies and Global Change at Tougaloo College, as well as the Director of the Honors Program at Tougaloo College. I also am an ordained clergy person in the United Methodist Church. For me, the most important contribution of the Hizmet Movement has been for Americans, and I think the rest of the world, to see that Islam is not disabled by modernity. I think Hizmet has helped us to see that you don't have to be a fanatic, you don't have to be a fundamentalist, you certainly don't have to be a terrorist, you don't have to be violent in any way for Islam to be able to stand on its own in the modern world. Islam has a great deal to say about human life and about the natural world, and about how human beings in the natural world can interact in healthy ways. And that can be done without resort to authoritarianism, and without resort to control, and without resort to indoctrination. And I think one of the things that he's helped people to see is that democracy is completely compatible with Islam, and that human rights are completely compatible with Islam. So one of the things, particularly in our nation's history after September 11th, with so much suspicion and so much misunderstanding, so much prejudice that's been leveled at Islam because of these other kinds of expressions, the Wahhabi, the Al-Qaedas that are out there, and of course now with ISIS, there is a great deal of fear, really. People don't want to get to know what Islam is about. They don't want to get to know what their Muslim neighbors think or believe or why they are who they are, because everything's been so wrapped up in this sense of, okay, well, it can only be one thing and it's going to be bad. And certainly Europe has struggled with that as well. So I think as Hizmet has helped to transform Turkey and helped to make Turkey, much more receptive to its own democratic reforms and much more able to then enter into the global stage in a much more productive way than it had been during the Turkish Republic period. I think also non-Muslims around the world have been able to see Islam in a new way through Hizmet, in a way that's positive, in a way that's open, in a way that's interrelational, in a way that's about neighbors coming together and valuing each other rather than, cultures in conflict. Samuel Huntington's thesis of the clash of civilizations was something that Gulen adamantly opposed. He said, look, we don't have to have civilizations clash. This can be the cooperation of civilizations. So I think Gulen embodies and he gives voice to that other side of Islam and the hundreds of millions of Muslims around the world who reject the extremism, who reject the violence of these 20th century Islamic movements that responded to European colonialism, and are saying, no, we can actually, do this differently. We can bring the 21st century reality into Islamic experience and have this be something that will be good for both. Um, and I think ultimately it's important for Americans because we consume so much of our information through media, and we don't actually avail ourselves to more educated sources. It's important for Americans to be able to know the movement through its people, because it can see then how the principles of the movement and the beliefs and the teachings about nonviolence and about pluralism and about generosity are actually embodied in those individuals. So I think that's the lasting contribution of Gulen and the movement that's arisen in response to his teachings and his writings, is that I think actually it's at the forefront of an Islamic reformation. I mean, there's been a number of Muslim writers that have been talking about this over the last 15, 20 years, that we are at a period in history, not only of global history in this kind of, postmodern, globalized, capitalistic, environment, but also for Islamic history, that this is a key point in Islam's history where it is making some important decisions about which way it will respond to this world history, much the way that Christianity did 500 years ago. Reza Arslan is one of those who's talked about it, and I think Gulen actually represents that voice of reformation, that voice of engagement, that voice of cooperation, that's not about conflict, that's not about trying to, make some sort of Islamic state that will be a pure place for Muslims to go and they'll be protected from this evil Western world. No, I mean, that's just ludicrous. And everyone knows that, except I guess the people who are trying to make this Islamic state, which makes it even more tragic. But Gulen and Hizmet are basically saying, look, we know that all of this fundamentalism and all of this violence is not only against Islam, but it's also counterproductive. It will never lead to any flourishing human community. But we know that we can do this because we've made it work in Turkey, we've made it work in Central Asia, we've made it work in other places. It's worked for us, right? We found life through it. I think what Hizmet does is it actually takes that long Sufi tradition of openness and of inward connection to God. And through that inward connection to God, you realize that God is speaking not only to oneself, but to every other human being around you. And therefore, it's not your right to control how they live. It's not your right to tell them what they should think, because God is speaking to them too. I mean, the thing about the Sufis are because they know what God feels like in their own lives, they can recognize the movement of God in other people's lives. And therefore, it's not about setting up authoritarian systems. It's not about setting up, monarchies or dictatorships or caliphates or anything where it's all about putting in a power structure of trying to make people obey somebody else. The Sufi tradition understands that no, God is leading people into full, healthy life anyway, as long as we can step out of the way and allow ourselves to listen. And I think what Hizmet does is takes that historic Sufi perspective that Islam has taught and really spreads it out, around the world in many, many ways. This is really a spirituality of friendship. And if we look at one of the greatest Sufi writers through the centuries, Jalaluddin Rumi, the key motif that he had over and over was about friendship. The friendship that he had with Shahs, the friendship that he had with many other people, the friends that he had with Christians, the friends that he had with Jews, and ultimately the friendship that he had with God. That was the model for what human friendship should try to be. Friendship which is always looking at the other person as an unconditionally valuable thing in its own right, reality in its own right. It's not an instrument to be used for something else. And it's not about that we put the teachings above the people. No, we put the teachings are for the benefit of the people, right? And so you don't try to subsume people under some sort of conceptual dogmatic framework. No, you use the wisdom of the years to be able to help bring life to the people. And if that means it needs to be done a little bit differently in this context than that context, then that's okay. It doesn't have to be rigid, and it doesn't have to be based on fear, and it doesn't have to be based on control. From my perspective as someone who's from the Methodist tradition, I see the value in how these schools help to make better communities, how they help move people from limited economic opportunity into a middle class and into a place, at the table of globalization. So I think there's a great deal of not only economic mobility that can come through these schools, but I also think it can make stronger communities, it can make better citizens. People are more informed when they vote because they're educated, they have a better sense of history, they have more self-confidence, and I think they're genuinely more open to other cultures through that education. I'm also impressed that in these schools there is no religious instruction, that the philosophy behind Hizmet is, no, we're not going to be teaching religion in these schools. These are not madrasas, right? These are, but that's not to say that spirituality isn't connected to the schools. It is through the character of the teachers. So the philosophy for Hizmet is, if people are going to learn about what being a good person religiously means, it's not going to be through a text in a class. It's going to be through their relationship with their teacher. And they're going to see it in the character and the integrity and the ethics of their teacher. They're going to see it in the way their teacher cares about them. And then after they're done with school, they may say, okay, well, what made my teacher such a good teacher? And they may want to know that. And the teacher may share, well, this is my journey. But it's not going to happen in the school. It's not going to happen in the classroom. And it's not about indoctrination. So I think that, to me, is extremely important, because it shows that you're teaching, basically you're incarnating your beliefs in your person. And you're teaching through your character about what your faith means. But you're not teaching the content of the faith. People are seeing what a kind and caring person is, and realizing, oh, that must be connected to what they believe. Maybe I would like to learn more about that. But in the classroom, no, we're going to focus on, on the subjects that we need to know. Hizmet is very trusting. So Hizmet is not fundamentalist. Hizmet is not radical, precisely because Hizmet has the deeper faith in God, the deeper faith in human beings, that these fundamentalist radical groups don't have.
Everything about the Hizmet movement that I have experienced, the people and the actions of the movement, are of loving, caring, giving people whose acts of charity and generosity are just staggering.